What would you sacrifice for beauty? Your comfort? Your reputation? Or your entire life? Because that's exactly what Oscar Wilde did. He wasn't just a writer, he was a performer, a provocateur, and a man who turned life itself into an art form. And in the end, the very thing that made him famous also destroyed him. Today we're diving into the story of Oscar Wilde, the genius who dazzled Victorian London with his wit, challenged its morals, and paid a devastating price for daring to be himself. Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde was born in Dublin on October 16, 1854, and even his name sounded like poetry. He grew up surrounded by words. His mother, Jane Wilde, was a celebrated poet and Irish nationalist. His father, Sir William Wilde, was a respected eye surgeon who also published books on folklore. From a young age, Oscar absorbed two powerful things: language and attention. He once said, "I put all my genius into my life. I put only my talent into my work." And that's exactly what he did. At Trinity College Dublin and later at Oxford, Wilde was a star. He studied the classics, won prizes, and started dressing like no one else: velvet jackets, silk scarves, flowers in his lapel. To some, he looked ridiculous. To others, revolutionary. To Oscar, it was art. Every detail, every gesture was a performance. By the 1880s, Wilde had moved to London, the beating heart of the British Empire, and made it his stage. He became famous not for books, but for being Oscar Wilde. He toured America, giving lectures about aesthetics. Yes, an entire tour about beauty. When a customs officer asked if he had anything to declare, Wilde replied, "Only my genius." That was Oscar. Bold, brilliant, and utterly impossible to ignore. His essays and plays followed soon after: The Picture of Dorian Gray, An Ideal Husband, The Importance of Being Earnest, each one dripping with wit, irony, and moral rebellion. He mocked high society by exposing its hypocrisy. He held up a mirror, and people loved and hated what they saw. But behind the witty one-liners and perfect posture, Wilde carried a secret, one that Victorian England would never forgive. In 1891, Wilde met Lord Alfred Douglas, known as Bosie, a young, beautiful poet with golden hair and a volatile temper. Their relationship was intense, romantic, and dangerous. Homosexuality was illegal in Britain at the time, punishable by prison and hard labor. But Wilde, ever the artist, refused to hide. He wrote letters to Bosie filled with passion and longing. "It is a marvel that those red rose-leaf lips of yours should be made no less for music of song than for madness of kissing." They met in secret, but they also dined in public. And that made Bosie's father furious. The Marquess of Queensberry, an arrogant, violent man, began to stalk Wilde, calling him a posing sodomite in a public note. That insult could have been ignored, but Wilde's pride, and maybe his belief that wit could conquer anything, pushed him to fight back. He sued Queensberry for libel. It was the worst decision of his life. In court, Wilde was confident, even humorous. He sparred with the prosecutor like he was back on stage. When asked if a certain young man was too old to be, quote, corrupted, Wilde quipped, "No one is too old to learn something new." The audience laughed, but the court did not. Queensberry's lawyers produced letters, love letters, and witnesses from London's underground scene. The truth was laid bare. Wilde was having relationships with men. His case collapsed, and instead of being the accuser, he became the accused. The British press devoured him. The public who once adored him now sneered. Wilde was arrested, tried, and convicted for gross indecency. His sentence was 2 years of hard labor. Imagine that. One of the sharpest minds of his time, reduced to breaking stones in prison. Prison broke Wilde, physically and emotionally. He lost his health, his fortune, and his family. His name was removed from theaters. His plays stopped running. He was no longer Oscar Wilde, the celebrated wit. He was prisoner C.3.3. But even in the darkness, he wrote. From his cell came De Profundis, a long, heartbreaking letter to Bosie, filled with regret, love, and spiritual searching. He wrote, "Where there is sorrow, there is holy ground." That line alone reveals something few understood about Wilde, that beneath the glitter, there was depth. Beneath the laughter, pain. In 1897, Wilde was released, but London had turned its back on him. He fled to France, where he lived under the name Sebastian Melmoth, a nod to one of his literary heroes. He was broke, sick, and lonely, but he never lost his charm. One night in a shabby Paris cafe, he said to have remarked, "My wallpaper and I are fighting a duel to the death. One of us has to go." Days later, in November 1900, Oscar Wilde died, penniless, at just 46 years old. He was buried in a cheap grave. Later, admirers moved his remains to Père Lachaise Cemetery, where his tomb, adorned with a stone angel, became a pilgrimage site. For decades, visitors kissed the stone, leaving lipstick marks as bright as Wilde's words once were. Today, Wilde's story feels eerily modern. He was punished for being authentic in a world that demanded conformity. He turned pain into art, and failure into immortality. His wit still lives on in quotes we repeat without even realizing it. Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. The truth is rarely pure and never simple. To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That is all. Oscar Wilde didn't just write about beauty. He embodied it, even when it cost him everything. So what would you sacrifice for beauty? For art? For love? Maybe Oscar's answer, his life, still echoes a warning. Genius may light the room, but it also burns.